The neural crown felt heavier today than it had in years. General Corin Vex adjusted the metallic interface that connected his mind to the vast network of Earth's remaining defense systems, wincing as the familiar electric ache spread through his skull, through the panoramic windows of Command Station Sigma 7, suspended 3 kilometers above the ruins of what had once been New Geneva. He watched the morning light reveal the scope of humanity's devastation. 97% of the human population was gone. The Olthic Empire had seen to that with methodical precision over the past decade. What remained of Earth's 12 billion souls now numbered fewer than 300 million, scattered across hidden underground cities, orbital stations, and a handful of surface settlements that had managed to avoid the aliens' orbital bombardments. Corin was 38 years old, and he had been fighting this war for half his life. The media called him the last human general, a title that felt like a tombstone inscription, rather than an honor. Every other flag officer was dead, along with most of their fleets, armies, and the civilizations they had sworn to protect. "Sir," came the voice of Lieutenant Mirakosenko, his aide-de-camp and one of the few military personnel who still bothered with formal protocol. "The morning intelligence brief is ready." Corin nodded without turning from the window. Below, the skeletal remains of humanity's greatest city stretched toward the horizon, its once proud towers reduced to twisted metal and glass. The Olthic had a particular talent for psychological warfare. They left just enough infrastructure standing to remind survivors of what they had lost. The briefing room adjoined his office, its walls lined with holographic displays showing the tactical situation across the solar system. Red markers indicated confirmed Olthic positions. Blue showed human strongholds. The ratio was approximately 50-1, and it was getting worse every day. The Olthic Third Fleet has established a blockade around Mars, reported Intelligence Officer Yin Devereaux, his weathered face illuminated by the tactical displays. "Our colonies, they have maybe 2 weeks before they surrender or starve." Corin's jaw tightened. Mars housed nearly 40 million people, the largest concentration of human survivors outside Earth. "What about the Jupiter mining stations? 7 of them have gone dark in the past 48 hours. We're assuming they've been overrun." Devereaux's voice carried the flat tone of a man who had delivered too much bad news over too many years. "The Olthic are tightening the noose, sir. Classic siege doctrine." The door chimed, and Admiral Nix Caldres entered without waiting for permission. At 63, she was old enough to remember when humanity had colonies on over 200 worlds. Now she commanded what remained of the Solar Defense Fleet, 47 ships of various sizes, most of them held together by recycled parts and stubborn engineering. "Corin," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command and the rasp of too many stimulants, "we need to talk privately." He dismissed the briefing staff with a gesture. When they were alone, Caldres activated a privacy field that would prevent electronic surveillance. "I've been analyzing the Olthic communication patterns," she began, her fingers dancing across a portable tactical display. "There's something we've missed. They're not just trying to exterminate us, they're trying to break us completely, psychologically." Corin frowned. "Explain." "Look at their target selection over the past year." The display showed a 3-dimensional map of the solar system, with attack patterns highlighted in red. "They could have wiped us out completely months ago. Instead, they're taking their time, making each victory hurt as much as possible. They want us to lose hope before we lose our lives. To what end? I think they're studying us, our breaking point, our capacity for resistance." Caldres met his eyes. "I think humanity is some kind of test case for them. They want to see how much pressure it takes to shatter a species' will to fight." The implications hit Corin like a physical blow. "If that's true, then every day we continue to resist, we're proving something to them, or proving something to ourselves." Caldres leaned forward. "Corin, there's something else. We've detected unusual electromagnetic signatures from several dead colonies, places that were supposedly sterilized months ago. Survivors, maybe, or maybe something else entirely." She paused. "I want permission to take a small fleet and investigate. If there are people still alive out there, people we thought were dead, then everything changes." Corin stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through possibilities. The neural crown pulsed gently against his skull, connecting him to the vast network of sensors and computers that monitored humanity's dwindling domain. Somewhere in that network, he could feel the weight of 300 million people looking to him for salvation. He was called the last human general because everyone assumed the war was nearly over. But perhaps it was time to prove that assumption wrong. Take the 5th Squadron, he said finally, but maintain calm silence until you're sure. If you find what I think you might find, we'll need every advantage surprise can give us. Admiral Calder smiled the first genuine smile Corin had seen from her in months. Understood, sir. One way or another, we're going to find out what humanity is really made of. The stealth corvette Race Edge drifted through the asteroid field. That had once been Ceres Station, its passive sensors probing the debris for signs of life. Admiral Calders watched the readings from her command chair, her experience at catching patterns that younger officers might miss. There, she whispered, pointing to a cluster of metallic signatures hidden in the shadow of a massive asteroid. Fragment. That's not random debris. Captain Finn St. Augustine, commander of the Race Edge, leaned over his tactical console. I'm reading power signatures. Weak, but definitely artificial. Could be automated systems, but survivors would be running minimal power to avoid detection. Calders finished. Take us in. Slowly, as they approached, the hidden structure revealed itself, a crude but ingenious construction of welded hull plates and salvaged equipment built into the hollow interior of the asteroid fragment. It was clearly human engineering, but adapted for survival in the most hostile environment imaginable. Mum called Communications Officer Jorik Haugen. I'm detecting encrypted transmissions. Human encryption protocols, but heavily modified. Can you decode them? Working on it. Haugen's fingers flew across his console. Got it. There. They're talking about us. They know we're here. The main screen flickered to life, showing a face that made Calders's breath catch. The woman was perhaps 40, with the lean build and radiation-scarred skin of someone who had spent years in improvised shelters. But her eyes blazed with an intensity that spoke of unbroken will. Admiral Calders, the woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the comm channel. I'm Colonel Rena Voss, commanding officer of what we're calling the Ceres Resistance. We've been waiting for you, Colonel Voss. I thought Ceres was destroyed months ago. The oath that claimed total sterilization. Voss's smile was sharp as a blade. The oath that claimed a lot of things. Would you like to see what actually happened here? An hour later, Calders found herself in the makeshift command center of the hidden base, surrounded by equipment that represented humanity's talent for creative survival. Banks of quantum computers hummed quietly, powered by a fusion reactor that had been built from the wreckage of 3 different ship designs. We lost 60,000 people in the initial attack, Voss explained, gesturing to a holographic display showing the timeline of Ceres stations. Destruction. But the station's evacuation protocols worked better than anyone expected. We got almost 40,000 people into the deep shelters before the orbital bombardment hit. But the Ulthix sent ground forces to finish the job, observed Captain St. Augustine. They did, and that's where things got interesting. Voss manipulated the display, showing tactical recordings from the battle. We prepared for the scenario. Every corridor, every chamber, every ventilation shaft was rigged with sensors and surprises. The Ulthix expected broken survivors hiding in bunkers. Instead, they found a meat grinder. The recordings showed Ulthix assault troops 8 foot tall, reptilian humanoids in powered armor advancing through what appeared to be abandoned mining tunnels. Then the ambushes began, improvised explosives, jury-rigged energy weapons, humans emerging from concealed positions to attack with salvaged Ulthix weapons, then vanishing back into the maze of tunnels. We killed over 3,000 of them. In the first week, Voss continued, but they kept coming, so we changed tactics. The display shifted to show external camera feeds. Ulthix ships in orbit around Ceres, their crews confident in their victory. Then, without warning, the asteroid began to break apart not from bombardment, but from controlled explosions set off from within. We convinced them they'd won, Voss said. Let them think their orbital strikes had destabilized the asteroid's core. They watched Ceres break apart and reported mission accomplished. What they didn't realize was that we planned the whole thing. Every fragment was actually a prefabricated shelter with its own life support. Calder stared at the recordings in amazement. You faked your own deaths and scattered across the asteroid field. Exactly, and while they were congratulating themselves on another successful genocide, we were building this. Voss gestured around the command center. 47 separate installations, all connected by concealed communication relays. 26,000 survivors, all of them armed and trained and very, very angry. Colonel, Calder said slowly, What exactly have you been doing for the past 6 months? Voss's smile turned predatory. We've been hunting, Admiral. Every Ulthid patrol that comes through this system, every supply convoy, every reconnaissance mission, we track them, we study them, and then we kill them, quietly, efficiently, and we take their equipment. She led them to another section of the base, where human technicians worked alongside captured Ulthid technology, weapons, armor, communication equipment, even small spacecraft. We've learned to operate their systems, Voss explained. More importantly, we've learned to modify them. The Ulthid have excellent technology, but they're not particularly creative. They never expected us to turn their own weapons against them in ways they never imagined. A young technician looked up from a workbench where she was integrating human and Ulthid components. Ma'am, the new pulse rifles are ready for testing. We've managed to increase their power output by 30%. Excellent work, Kira. Voss turned back to Culdris. Admiral, I've been monitoring fleet communications. I know the situation. Looks hopeless from where you're sitting. But what if I told you that Ceres isn't the only dead colony that's actually very much alive? Culdris felt her pulse quicken. How many? We've made contact with 17 other resistance cells, some bigger than ours, some smaller. All of them following the same basic strategy, fake death. Go underground and start bleeding the Ulthid. One patrol at a time. The implications were staggering. If even a fraction of the supposedly dead colonies had survivors. If those survivors were organized and armed, Colonel, Culdris said, I need to get this information to General Vex immediately. If what you're saying is true, then we're not looking at the end of humanity. We're looking at the beginning of something entirely different. A war of shadows, Voss agreed. But Admiral, before you go, there's something else you need to see. Something that's going to change how you think about this entire conflict. She led them to a secured chamber where a single Ulthid prisoner sat restrained, in a specially modified chair. The alien's scaled skin showed signs of careful interrogation, nothing crude, but clearly effective. Meet HFY, Voss said. He's been very helpful in explaining Ulthid military doctrine. Haven't you, HFY? The alien's reptilian eyes fixed on Culdris with undisguised hatred. You will all burn, it hissed in accented standard. The Empire will cleanse this system of your filth. That's what he said 6 months ago, Voss observed. But his tune has been changing lately. Tell the Admiral what you told me yesterday, HFY. The alien remained silent until Voss made a small adjustment to his restraints. Then it spoke, its voice filled with something that might have been fear. The High Command grows, concerned. It admitted too many patrols failed to report. Too many ships simply vanish. They speak of ghosts in the dark places. Culdris and Voss exchanged glances. The Ulthid Empire had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, but they had never faced anything like humanity's capacity for vengeful resurrection. General Korn Vex stood before the largest gathering of human military leaders in over a year. The secure conference chamber aboard Command Station Sigma 7 hummed with tension, as representatives from across the solar system participated via encrypted holographic links. The intelligence Admiral Culdris had brought back from Ceres had changed everything. The numbers are staggering, reported Intelligence Officer Devereaux, his voice carrying a note of barely contained excitement. 19 confirmed resistance cells, with a combined population of over 800,000. And those are just the ones we've made contact with so far. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. 800,000 people they had thought were dead, all of them armed, trained, and conducting guerrilla operations against Ulthid forces. More importantly, continued Admiral Culdris from her position at the tactical display, they've been coordinating their attacks. The Ulthid have lost over 40 ships in the past 6 months, not to fleet actions, but to what they're calling anomalous disappearances. Colonel Voss appeared via hologram from the Ceres base, her scarred features grim but determined. We've been analyzing their patrol patterns, Admiral. The Ulthid are starting to adapt. They're sending larger forces, staying closer to their main fleet elements. They're scared. Good, said General Vex, his neural crown pulsing as he interfaced with the tactical network. Fear is a weapon we can use, but we need to escalate before they fully adapt to our new strategy. The discussion that followed was unlike any military planning session in human history. Instead of grand fleet movements and frontal assaults, they discussed ambush tactics, psychological warfare, and the art of making an enemy paranoid about shadows. The key is simultaneity, explained Commander Zaranelkith, representing the resistance cell on Europa. We hit them everywhere at once. Make them feel like the entire solar system has turned hostile. What about casualties? Asked Admiral Caldris. Our people are brave, but they're also irreplaceable. We can't afford to throw away lives on suicide missions. Voss leaned forward in her holographic representation. That's where our advantage lies, Admiral. The Ulthuk fight like conquerors. They expect their enemies to meet them in open battle, to defend fixed positions that can be destroyed with overwhelming force. But we're not fighting to hold territory anymore. We're fighting to survive, and that makes us infinitely more dangerous, General. Vex studied the tactical displays showing Ulthuk positions throughout the solar system. Red markers indicated major fleet concentrations, supply depots, and communication relays. There were hundreds of targets, but also thousands of Ulthuk ships and millions of enemy personnel. We need something that will force them to spread their forces, he said finally. Something that will make them question their intelligence about human capabilities. I have a proposal, said Captain St. Augustine, speaking from the bridge of the race edge. What if we convince them that we've developed some kind of new weapon? Something that explains how we're destroying their ships. They demand proof, objected Commander Nelkith. Then we give them proof, Voss interjected, her voice carrying a note of cold satisfaction, but not the kind they're expecting. She explained her plan in detail, and the silence that followed was heavy with implications. What she was proposing would require sacrifices both of equipment and personnel, but it might also convince the Ulthuk that humanity had developed capabilities far beyond what they had demonstrated before. It's insane, said Admiral Caldris finally, but it might work. It will work, Voss corrected, because the Ulthuk have made the same mistake every empire makes. They have started believing their own propaganda about the weakness of their enemies. General Vex made the decision with the weight of species survival on his shoulders. Do it. All cells coordinate through Admiral Caldris. Operation Lazarus begins in 72 hours. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation across the solar system. Resistance cells prepared for coordinated strikes against Ulthuk forces. But at the heart of the operation was Colonel Voss's gamut of deception so audacious that it would either terrify the Ulthuk into overreaction or expose humanity's desperation. The plan required sacrificing one of their most precious assets, the stealth corvette Shadow of Mars, one of only 6 such ships remaining in the human fleet. But the sacrifice would be worth it if it convinced the Ulthuk that humanity had developed some kind of SUP or WEAPO. And Captain Yuki Tanaka, commander of the Shadow of Mars, volunteered her ship for the mission despite knowing the risks. My crew understands what we're attempting, she reported to Admiral Caldris as they made final preparations. We're not just attacking a target, we're selling a story. The target was the Ulthuk supply depot at Titan Station, a massive orbital facility that coordinated logistics for the entire Third Fleet. Destroying it would certainly hurt the enemy, but the real goal was to make the destruction appear to be the result of a weapon system that Ulthuk couldn't understand. Remember, Caldris told the assembled strike teams, timing is everything. The Ceres cell hits the communication relay at 0300 hours. Europa takes out the patrol base at 0315. Mars resistance hits the supply convoy at 0330, and Captain Tanaka. She paused, meeting the younger woman's eyes. You light up the sky at 0400 hours. The attacks began precisely on schedule. Across the solar system, human resistance cells emerged from hiding to strike at Ulthuk positions. Most of the attacks were conventional explosive charges, hijacked Ulthuk weapons, carefully planned ambushes that left no survivors to report what had happened. But the attack on Titan Station was different. Captain Tanaka brought her ship in, on a trajectory that would have been impossible for conventional weapons to achieve. Using the combination of gravitational slingshots and modified Ulthuk stealth technology, the Shadow of Mars appeared on Titan Station sensors for exactly 17 seconds. Long enough to be detected and tracked, but not long enough for effective countermeasures. The ship's payload wasn't conventional explosives. Instead, Tanaka had loaded every antimatter containment system they could acquire, along with several fusion warheads and a collection of exotic matter from humanity's most advanced physics laboratories. The explosion that followed would be unlike anything the Ulthuk had ever seen. This is Shadow of Mars, Tanaka reported over the emergency frequency as her ship made its final approach. We see the target. Beginning final attack run. The Ulthuk Defenders at Titan Station had time to fire exactly one defensive salvo. Before the shadow of Mars struck home, the explosion lit up the Saturnian system like a miniature star, completely vaporizing the massive supply depot and sending shock waves that were detected as far away as Jupiter. But more importantly, the energy signature of the explosion was utterly unlike anything in the Olthic database. It appeared to be some kind of exotic matter reaction, suggesting that humanity had developed weapons technology that far exceeded their previous capabilities. Within hours, Olthic High Command was in emergency session. Within days, they were redeploying fleet elements to protect what they now considered high-value targets. And within weeks, they would make the decision that would change the course of the war. General Vex watched the intelligence reports flooding in with grim satisfaction. The Olthic were pulling back from forward positions, consolidating their forces, and demanding reinforcements from other sectors of their empire. "They're scared," Admiral Caldrus observed, studying the tactical displays. "For the first time since this war began, they're actually afraid of us." "Good," Vex replied, "because now they're going to learn what happens when you try to exterminate a species that refuses to die." The Olthic response came with the merciless efficiency of a machine designed for total war. High Commander Thekmer, Supreme Leader of the Third Fleet, stood before the War Council aboard the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion, his scaled features reflecting the cold fury that had made him the youngest fleet commander in Empire history. "Explain to me," he hissed, his voice carrying the sibilant undertones that marked his species' anger, "how a supposedly broken enemy has destroyed 17 of our installations in the past month." Fleet Admiral Zexkara, responsible for intelligence operations, shifted uncomfortably in her restrained harness. "High Commander, our analysis indicates the humans have developed some form of exotic weapon technology. The energy signatures from the Titan Station attack are irrelevant," Thekmer interrupted. "What matters is that they are making us appear weak." The High Council questioned our progress. Other fleet commanders mock our inability to finish a simple sterilization operation. The massive display screens around the War Council showed the tactical situation throughout the Sol system. Red markers indicated confirmed human resistance activity. The number had grown from a handful to over 50 active cells, and new ones were being discovered every day. "Sir," interjected War Leader Corvinthuk, Commander of Ground Forces, "perhaps we should consider alternative strategies. The humans are employing guerrilla tactics that our forces are not optimally configured to counter." Thekmer's predatory gaze fixed on his subordinate. "Are you suggesting that the might of the Empire is insufficient to defeat a handful of primitives hiding in asteroid fields?" "Not insufficient, High Commander, but perhaps inefficiently applied." The silence that followed was dangerous. In the Olthic military hierarchy, questioning a superior's judgment was tantamount to challenging their right to command. But Corvinthuk continued, his voice steady despite the risk. "The humans are not fighting to win territory, sir. They are fighting to survive. This makes them unpredictable and willing to accept casualty rates that would break any rational military force. Our standard siege tactics assume an enemy that values strategic assets over individual lives. Then we make them value their lives more than their resistance." Thekmer decided. "Initiate Protocol Omega-7, full planetary sterilization of all human population centers, no exceptions, no survivors." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Protocol Omega-7 was reserved for the most stubborn enemy civilizations, those that refused to accept the inevitable. It meant the complete eradication of all life on every world, moon, and station in the target system. "High Commander," Admiral Zexkara said carefully, "the High Council has not authorized. The High Council granted me full tactical authority." Thekmer replied, "This is a tactical decision. Begin immediately." But the Olthic had underestimated their enemy's capacity for both intelligence gathering and desperate innovation. Deep within the Ceres resistance base, Colonel Voss watched the intercepted Olthic communications with the cold calculation of someone who had already lost everything once. "They're going to sterilize everything," she reported to the emergency command conference. "Every human settlement, every orbital station, every hidden base they can find. Protocol Omega-7 means they're going to bathe the entire system in radiation until nothing can survive." General Vex felt the neural crown's weight increase as emergency signals flooded in. From across the solar system, every resistance cell was reporting the same intelligence, massive Olthic fleet movements, deployment of stellar bombardment weapons, and the ominous charging of Antimatter torpedo batteries. "How long do we have?" he asked. 72 hours, replied Admiral Caldris. "Maybe less. They're positioning their dreadnoughts for simultaneous strikes on all major population centers." The mathematics were brutal. 300 million humans scattered across dozens of locations, facing an enemy fleet that could literally sterilize planets. Even if every resistance cell fought to the last person, they couldn't prevent the systematic destruction of human civilization. "There's another option," Colonel Voss said quietly, "but it means abandoning everything we've tried to preserve." She outlined her proposal in stark terms. Instead of fighting offensively to protect human settlements, they would use the next 72 hours to evacuate everyone they could, to pre-position mobile facilities, asteroid mining ships, deep space research stations, and converted cargo vessels. Everything that couldn't be moved would be destroyed by the humans themselves, denying the Olthic the satisfaction of conquest. "You're talking about turning humanity into a nomadic species," observed Commander Nelkith from Europa. "No fixed homes, no permanent bases, no territory to defend. I'm talking about survival." Voss replied, "And more than that, I'm talking about becoming something the Olthic have never faced before. A civilization that exists entirely in the spaces between their control." The debate that followed was fierce but brief. They didn't have time for extended deliberation, and the alternatives were extinction or surrender. In the end, the vote was unanimous. Operation Exodus would begin immediately. What followed was perhaps the most remarkable logistical achievement in human history. In less than 72 hours, resistance cells across the solar system coordinated the evacuation of over 200 million people. Asteroid mining vessels designed for crews of dozens found themselves carrying thousands of refugees. Research stations became improvised fleet bases, cargo ships became mobile cities, but evacuation was only part of the plan. As the last transport ships departed from doomed settlements, human engineering teams implemented the final phase of Colonel Voss's strategy, the complete destruction of anything that might be useful to the Olthic. Fusion reactors were overloaded. Orbital platforms were sent on collision courses with their own support structures. Entire cities were rigged with improvised explosive devices and vaporized just moments before Olthic ground forces arrived to occupy them. When the Olthic bombardment began, they found themselves attacking empty ruins and pre-destroyed infrastructure. Their sensors detected the massive energy releases from human settlements, but instead of the terror-filled final moments of a dying civilization, they were witnessing the deliberate self-immolation of a species that refused to provide their enemies with the satisfaction of conquest. High Commander Thekmer watched the bombardment reports with growing frustration. "Status report," he demanded. "All primary targets destroyed, sir," reported Fleet Admiral Zekskara. "However, casualty estimates are unusually low. Our reconnaissance suggests the humans evacuated most population centers before our attack began." "Impossible. How could they move 300 million people in 3 days?" "Unknown, sir. But sensor data indicates massive fleet movement throughout the system. In the hours before our bombardment, hundreds of vessels of unknown configuration, all moving away from major population centers." Thekmer studied the tactical displays with the growing realization that he had been outmaneuvered. Protocol Omega-7 was designed to break enemy morale by demonstrating the futility of resistance. But the humans had turned his own strategy against him, using the threat of total destruction as cover for the largest evacuation in galactic history. "Find them," he ordered. "Every ship, every base, every hiding place. Use deep range sensors, gravity wave detectors, anything necessary. The humans may have escaped our bombardment, but they cannot hide in empty space forever." But even as he gave the orders, Thekmer felt the first stirrings of doubt. The humans had surprised him repeatedly, adapting to every strategy he employed. Now they had become something unprecedented, a major civilization with no fixed territory to defend, and no infrastructure to protect in the depths of space. General Vex stood on the bridge of his new flagship, a converted asteroid mining vessel, designated Defiant Hope. Around him, the scattered remnants of human civilization moved through the darkness in a loose formation of hundreds of ships. "Status report," he requested. 237 million people successfully evacuated, reported Admiral Caldris. "We lost approximately 40 million in the evacuation, mostly volunteers, who stayed behind to operate the destruction protocols." The number hit Vex. Like a physical blow. 40 million people who had chosen to die rather than let the enemy claim victory over their homes. But their sacrifice had ensured that humanity survived, and more importantly, that they had become something entirely new. Admiral, he said finally, signal all ships. We are no longer fighting to defend human territory. From this moment forward, we are humanity's fleet in exile, and our territory is wherever we choose to make it. The transformation was complete. Humanity had become a civilization of ghosts, and the real war was about to begin. 6 months after the Great Exodus, the Olthic Empire was learning to fear the dark between stars. High Commander Degmer paced the command deck of Eternal Dominion, his claws clicking against the metal decking as he studied reports that made no tactical sense. 17 more ships, he muttered, reviewing the latest intelligence summaries. 17 ships that simply vanished from hyperspace transit routes, no distress signals, no debris fields, no evidence of what happened to them. Fleet Admiral Zexkara approached cautiously, her scaled features showing the strain of months without a decisive victory. Sir, long-range reconnaissance suggests the humans have established some kind of mobile fleet structure. Our analysts believe they're using captured Olthic vessels integrated with their own technology. Show me. The tactical display materialized above the command table, showing the outer system patrol route, a hyperspace corridor that connected Olthic forward bases with their supply lines to the Empire's core worlds. Red markers indicated confirmed ship disappearances over the past month. The pattern was unmistakable. Something was systematically hunting Olthic vessels. In the empty space between systems, they're not just raiding our supply lines, Degmer realized. They're studying our fleet movements, learning our tactical doctrines, preparing for something larger. His assessment was more accurate than he knew. Deep in the asteroid belt that had once been the Ceres colony, General Vex coordinated the largest military operation in human history. From the mobile command ship Defiant Hope, around him, holographic displays showed the positions of over 400 human vessels, some purpose-built warships. Others converted civilian craft armed with captured Olthic weapons. Admiral Caldrus reports the Outer Ring squadrons are in position, announced Commander Jorik Haugen, who had transferred from communications to serve as Vex's tactical coordinator. Colonel Voss confirms the Ghost Fleet is ready for deployment. The Ghost Fleet, 24 ships that appeared to be derelict hulks, but were actually sophisticated weapons platforms crewed by volunteers who had accepted the near certainty of death in service to the greater strategy. Each ship was designed for a single purpose: to get close enough to major Olthic vessels, to deploy weapons that the enemy couldn't defend against. Signal all units, Vex ordered. Operation Revelation begins in 30 minutes. Remember, this isn't about destroying their fleet, it's about forcing them to realize they're no longer fighting a broken enemy. The battle began in the outer reaches of the Jupiter system, where Olthic war leader Corvinthik commanded a patrol fleet of 37 vessels, investigating reports of human activity near the gas giant's radiation-shrouded moons. His ships moved in standard formation, confident in their numerical and technological superiority. They never saw the attack coming. The first indication of trouble came when the dreadnought Inexorable Victory simply stopped transmitting. One moment it was maintaining formation with the rest of the fleet. The next, its quantum communication array went silent. When the accompanying vessels moved to investigate, they found the massive ship drifting powerless, its hull breached in dozens of places by weapons that left no recognizable energy signatures. What happened here? Corvinthik demanded as his engineering teams examined the wreckage. What could disable a dreadnought without triggering any defensive systems? The answer came in the form of 15 human ships that decloaked simultaneously around the Olthic fleet. They were unlike anything in the enemy's tactical database, hybrid vessels that combined human engineering with captured Olthic technology, creating weapon systems that operated on principles the aliens had never encountered. Captain Yuki Tanaka commanded the lead ship, Vengeance of Titan, a heavily modified destroyer that had been rebuilt from the salvage of 3 different vessel types. All ships, this is Tanaka, execute attack pattern Lazarus. Target their command vessels first. The battle that followed defied every principle of conventional space warfare. Instead of maneuvering for optimal firing positions, the human ships closed to point-blank range, accepting massive damage to their own vessels in order to deliver weapons that could penetrate Olthic shields through direct contact. Vengeance of Titan rammed the Olthic cruiser Dominant Claw, its reinforced prow punching through the enemy's hull. before releasing a payload of modified quantum torpedoes. The explosion that followed consumed both ships, but not before Tanaka's sacrifice had eliminated the fleet's primary command vessel. Similar scenes played out across the battle zone. Human ships used kamikaze tactics, boarding actions, and weapons that seemed to violate the laws of physics to destroy Othic vessels that should have been immune to their attacks. The aliens found themselves facing an enemy that fought with a desperation and creativity they had never encountered. War leader Corvinthic watched his fleet die around him with the horror of a predator, suddenly finding itself prey. His flagship, Relentless Pursuit, shuddered under the impact of weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate its armor. On the tactical display, red markers representing his ships winked out one by one as human vessels pressed attacks that defied all military logic. They're not trying to win, he realized with growing terror. They're trying to learn. Every ship they lose is gathering data on our defensive systems. His assessment was confirmed when the human assault suddenly shifted tactics. Instead of continuing their seemingly suicidal attacks, the surviving ships began launching boarding pods, small, heavily armored craft that latched onto Othic hulls and disgorged teams of human soldiers armed with captured alien weapons. The fighting that followed was unlike anything in the Othic military experience. Human soldiers, many of them survivors of the colonies the Empire had destroyed, fought with the fury of the already dead. They moved through Othic ship corridors like avenging spirits, using modified alien weapons alongside improvised explosives and tactics that seemed to anticipate every defensive measure. Sergeant Kira Vexthan, one of Colonel Voss's handpicked commandos, led her team through the corridors of the Othic heavy cruiser Merciless Hunter. Her squad had trained for this moment for months, studying captured Othic ship schematics and learning to turn the aliens' own technology against them. Bridge is to levels up, she reported over her comm unit as her team moved through the ship's central access corridor. Resistance is lighter than expected. They're not prepared for close-quarters combat. The observation was accurate. Othic military doctrine emphasized ship-to-ship combat and orbital bombardment. Their soldiers were trained for suppressing ground-based resistance, not for the kind of brutal ship-to-ship fighting that humans had perfected. During their months of guerrilla warfare, Kira's team reached the bridge to find the Othic command crew attempting to activate their ship's self-destruct sequence. The firefight that followed was brief but savage. When the smoke cleared, the humans had captured not just the ship, but its entire tactical database information that would prove invaluable for future operations. Similar scenes played out across the battle zone. Of the 37 Othic ships that had entered the Jupiter system, only 12 escaped to report what had happened. The humans had lost 19 vessels, but they had gained something far more valuable, proof that they could defeat Othic forces in direct combat. More importantly, they had captured for intact enemy ships, along with their crews and military intelligence. The psychological impact of this victory would resonate throughout the Othic Empire. High Commander Thegmer received the battle reports with the growing realization that his strategic assumptions had been catastrophically wrong. The humans weren't just surviving, they were evolving. Every encounter with Othic forces made them stronger, more dangerous, more unpredictable. Casualties, he demanded. 25 ships destroyed. For captured, Fleet Admiral Zexkara reported. Approximately 40,000 personnel killed or missing. The humans appear to have developed boarding tactics specifically designed to counter our defensive systems. Thegmer studied the tactical recordings with the eye of a professional soldier. The human attacks showed clear evidence of detailed planning and intimate knowledge of Othic ship design. They had turned the Empire's own technology against itself. They're learning faster than we're adapting, he admitted. Every battle teaches them something new about our capabilities, while revealing nothing about their true strength. The implications were staggering. For the first time in the Empire's history, they were facing an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each defeat. The humans had transformed from a broken species, hiding in the ruins of their civilization, into something unprecedented. A military force that treated defeat as education and death as intelligence gathering. Sir, Zexkara said carefully, I recommend we request reinforcements from the 2nd Fleet. The humans are demonstrating capabilities that exceed our current intelligence estimates. Denied. Thegmer's voice carried the cold fury of a commander whose professional reputation was crumbling. We will not admit to the High Council that we require assistance to defeat a species we claim to have already conquered. But even as he spoke, Vecmer knew that the war had entered a new phase. The humans were no longer simply trying to survive, they were actively hunting Ulthic forces with the patience and skill of apex predators. And with each successful engagement, they were becoming more dangerous in the depths of space. General Vex reviewed the battle reports with grim satisfaction. The victory at Jupiter had cost them dearly 19 ships and over 8,000 personnel, but the intelligence they had gained was invaluable, and the psychological impact on the Ulthic was already evident in their intercepted communications. They're scared, Admiral Caldrus observed, studying the enemy fleet movements. Look at their patrol patterns. They're grouping their ships in larger formations, staying closer to their main fleet elements. They're starting to think defensively. Good, Vex replied. Fear makes enemies predictable, and predictable enemies can be defeated. He turned to Colonel Voss, who had been analyzing the captured Ulthic ships. What did we learn? Their technology is more advanced than ours, but it's also more rigid, she reported. They design their systems for specific functions and don't adapt well. The unexpected uses, we can exploit that. How? Voss smiled the cold, calculating expression that had made her legendary among the resistance cells. We're going to teach them that there's a difference between conquering a species and destroying one, and we're going to do it with their own weapons. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the Ulthic invasion began, humanity was fighting on its own terms. They had learned to turn defeat into victory, death into intelligence, and desperation into the deadliest weapon of all, the absolute refusal to surrender. The message arrived through channels so secret that only 3 people in the human fleet knew they existed. Deep in the command center of Defiant Hope, General Vex stared at the decoded transmission with the incredulous expression of a man who had just witnessed a miracle. It's confirmed, he said to Admiral Caldrus and Colonel Voss, who had been summoned for an emergency conference. The Kepler resistance cells are alive. All of them. The implications were staggering. Kepler had been one of humanity's most successful colony worlds, home to over 200 million people before the Ulthic sterilized it 8 months ago. The Empire had used the planet as a demonstration of their power, broadcasting recordings of the orbital bombardment across human space as proof that resistance was futile. How many? Caldrus asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. 106 to 7 million, Vex replied, reading from the encrypted message. They've been hiding in the deep cavern systems, using geothermal power and closed-loop life support, and they've been building something. The message included technical specifications that defied belief. The Kepler survivors had spent 8 months constructing a massive defensive installation in the planet's core, using salvaged materials and captured Ulthic technology. They had turned their entire world into a fortress and a trap. They're requesting immediate military support, Voss observed, studying the tactical data. The Ulthic are planning a major offensive against what they think is a dead world. If we can coordinate with the Kepler resistance, we could destroy an entire Ulthic fleet. Vex finished, but it would require committing most of our mobile forces to a single battle. If we lose, humanity loses everything. The debate that followed was fierce but brief. Intelligence indicated that High Commander Vecmer was personally leading the Kepler offensive. With over 200 ships, nearly half of the Ulthic Third Fleet, the aliens intended to use the planet as a testing ground for new weapons designed specifically to counter human guerrilla tactics. It's the perfect opportunity, Caldrus argued. We've been fighting offensively for over a year. This is our chance to take the offensive and prove that humanity is still a force to be reckoned with, or it's a trap, Voss countered. The Ulthic aren't stupid. They know we've been intercepting their communications. What if they're deliberately feeding us information to lure our entire fleet into a killing ground? Vex studied the intelligence reports, his neural crown processing data from across the human fleet. The mathematics were brutal. If they committed to the Kepler offensive and lost, the scattered remnants of humanity would be unable to mount any meaningful resistance. But if they won, we'd do it, he decided, but not as a conventional fleet engagement. We're going to turn this into the largest ambush in military history. The plan that emerged was audacious in its complexity. Instead of meeting the Ulthic fleet in open battle, the humans would use their knowledge of Kepler's geography to create a multi-layered trap. The planet's survivors would provide ground-based fire support while the human fleet engaged from carefully prepared positions in the outer system. Most importantly, they would use the Ulthic's own arrogance against them. The aliens expected to find a dead world and broken survivors. Instead, they would encounter a fully prepared defensive network that had been 8 months in the making. High Commander Thekmer approached Kepler for 4B with the confidence of a predator closing in on wounded prey. His fleet of 237 ships represented the largest concentration of Ulthic firepower in the sector, equipped with new weapons specifically designed to counter human tactics. Initiate deep-skin protocols, he ordered as his flagship, Eternal Dominion, moved into orbital position. I want to know the location of every human survivor before we begin the cleansing. The sensor sweeps revealed exactly what he expected: massive underground installations, evidence of continued industrial activity, and energy signatures consistent with a population in the tens of millions. The humans had been hiding in the deep caverns, exactly as intelligence had predicted. Begin orbital bombardment. They were commanded: target the primary cavern entrances, collapse their tunnels, and force them to the surface. The first barrage of antimatter torpedoes struck Kepler's surface with the force of small suns, vaporizing rock and metal in expanding fireballs. But instead of the expected secondary explosions from destroyed human installations, the sensors registered something impossible. The energy from the bombardment was being absorbed and redirected. "Sir," Fleet Admiral Zekskara reported, her voice tight with confusion. "The humans appear to have constructed some kind of planetary defense grid. They're channeling our weapons fire into their own power systems." Before Thekmer could respond, the planet's surface erupted in a display of defensive fire that exceeded every tactical projection. Massive energy cannons, built into the planet's crust and powered by the Ulthic's own bombardment, began targeting the orbital fleet with unprecedented accuracy. The heavy cruiser Relentless Conqueror was the first to die, its shields overloaded by a sustained barrage from weapons that shouldn't have existed. The battleship Inevitable Triumph followed moments later, its hull breached by energy beams that carved through its armor like tissue paper. They turned the entire planet into a weapon. Thekmer realized with growing horror. 8 months of preparation, they'd been waiting for us. But the ground-based defenses were only the beginning. As the Ulthic fleet struggled to respond to the planetary bombardment, General Vex's mobile forces emerged from their hiding places throughout the system. They had been waiting in the shadows of moons and asteroids, invisible to enemy sensors, until the moment they chose to reveal themselves. The human fleet that decloaked around the Ulthic formation was unlike anything the aliens had ever faced. 347 ships of various designs, all of them modified with captured Ulthic technology and armed with weapons that had been specifically designed to exploit enemy weaknesses. "All ships, this is General Vex," came the transmission. "Across all frequencies, today we stop running. Today we stop hiding. Today we remind the galaxy that humanity does not surrender." The battle that followed was the largest space engagement in human history. Captain Finn St. Augustine led a squadron of modified destroyers in a direct assault on the Ulthic command ships, his vessels weaving through enemy fire with the desperate grace of fighters who knew they were fighting for the survival of their species. "This is St. Augustine," he reported as his ship, Wraith's Vengeance, engaged the Ulthic Dread, not merciless domination, beginning attack run on primary target. "All ships, remember Ceres, remember Titan, remember everyone we've lost." The Wraith's Vengeance survived exactly 17 seconds in close combat with the Dreadnought before its reactor core breached. But those 17 seconds were enough to deliver a payload of quantum torpedoes that crippled the enemy vessels' main weapon systems. Similar scenes played out across the battle zone as human ships pressed attacks that defied all military logic. They fought with the fury of the already dead, trading their lives for enemy vessels in exchanges that gradually shifted the balance of the engagement. Admiral Calders commanded the fleet's heavy elements from the Bridge of Humanity's Defiance, a converted mining vessel that had been transformed into a mobile weapons platform. Her ships engaged the Ulthic fleet's center, drawing enemy fire away from the more vulnerable destroyer squadrons. "Target their formation leaders," she ordered as her ship's main guns engaged the Ulthic flagship. "Break their command structure, and their tactical coordination will collapse." The exchange of fire between Humanity's Defiance and Eternal Dominion lit up the space around Kepler with energies that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Both ships absorbed damage that should have been fatal, their crews fighting on even as their vessels disintegrated around them. On the planet's surface, the Kepler survivors continued their bombardment of the orbital battle. Commander Alexei Petrov, the senior officer who had coordinated the planet's defenses for 8 months, watched the battle through sensors that had been built into the planet's crust. All planetary batteries, concentrate fire on the enemy flagship. He ordered, support Admiral Caldris's attack. The combined assault from space and ground finally overwhelmed Eternal Dominion's defenses. The massive dreadnought shields collapsed under the sustained barrage, and its hull began to buckle under the stress of weapons fire from multiple directions. High Commander Degmer watched his fleet die around him with the cold realization that he had been outmaneuvered by an enemy he had consistently underestimated. The humans had turned his own assault into a trap, using his fleet's strength against itself, sir. Sexgar reported, "We've lost 60% of our ships. Request permission to withdraw." Degmer stared at the tactical display, seeing the red markers that represented destroyed Ulthik vessels. Over 150 ships gone, tens of thousands of his personnel dead, and the humans were still fighting with undiminished fury. "Withdrawal authorized," he said finally. "Signal all surviving ships. Emergency hyperspace jumped to rally point 7. But even as the surviving Ulthik vessels began their retreat, General Vex was coordinating the final phase of his strategy. Hidden throughout the system were additional human forces ships that had remained concealed until the moment when they could intercept the enemy's withdrawal. "This is Colonel Voss," came the transmission from the ambush force. "All retreating enemy vessels are now in our engagement zone, beginning final assault." The Ulthik ships that had survived the main battle found themselves facing fresh human forces armed with the latest intelligence about enemy weaknesses. The retreat became a running battle that continued for hours, as human ships harassed the fleeing aliens, destroying vessels that were already damaged and demoralized. When the battle finally ended, only 43 Ulthik ships had escaped. The humans had lost 112 vessels, but they had achieved something unprecedented: the complete destruction of a major enemy fleet. General Vex stood on the bridge of Defiant Hope, staring at the tactical display that showed the aftermath of humanity's greatest victory. The space around Kepler was littered with the wreckage of both fleets, but the planet itself still lived, its surface installations still functional. "Casualties?" he asked quietly. 27,000 killed or missing, Admiral Caldris reported. "But we've captured 8 intact enemy ships and over 3,000 prisoners. The intelligence value alone, and the Kepler survivors? Alive, all of them, their installations held throughout the battle." Vex nodded slowly. For the first time since the war began, humanity had proven that they could defeat the Ulthik Empire in direct combat, but more importantly, they had demonstrated that the human species could not be conquered by force alone. "Signal all ships," he ordered. "We're going home. It's time to remind the galaxy that humanity is still here." The news of the Kepler victory spread through human space like wildfire, carried by quantum-encrypted transmissions that reached every hidden colony, every resistance cell, every survivor who had thought their species was doomed. Within days, the scattered remnants of humanity began to believe what had seemed impossible: they could win. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler, General Korn Vex stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed command station New Horizon, watching the largest human fleet in over 2 years conduct maneuvers in the space around Titan. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering built from salvaged Ulthik materials and powered by fusion reactors that had been designed by survivors who had learned to turn their enemies' technology against them. "The Third Fleet is requesting permission to begin operations in the Proxima sector," reported Admiral Caldris, approaching with a data pad that contained the morning's intelligence briefings. "Our reconnaissance indicates 3 Ulthik supply depots that are lightly defended." Vex accepted the report with the satisfaction of a commander who had seen his strategic vision vindicated. The human fleet now numbered over 800 ships, ranging from purpose-built warships to converted civilian vessels that had been armed with captured alien technology. More importantly, they had learned to fight as the Ulthik had never expected, not as a conquered species seeking to reclaim lost territory, but as apex predators who had adapted to hunt in the dark between stars. "Approved," he said, "but remind the squadron commanders that we're not just destroying enemy installations, we're making a statement. Every Ulthik base we eliminate sends a message to their high command." The message was simple: humanity was no longer hiding. After 2 years of guerrilla warfare, they had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history: a major civilization that had survived total military defeat and returned stronger than before. The transformation was evident throughout human space. Colonies that had been written off as destroyed were revealing themselves to be very much alive, their populations armed and trained for warfare. Asteroid mining operations had been converted into mobile military bases. Research stations had become weapons development facilities. Humanity had learned to survive in the spaces between worlds, and in doing so, had become something their enemies could not defeat. Colonel Rena Voss, now promoted to the rank of general, stood in the command center of the series mobile base, coordinating resistance operations across the outer system. The facility had grown far beyond its original asteroid fragment, incorporating dozens of captured Ulthik ships and installations into a sprawling complex that served as headquarters for humanity's shadow war. The intelligence reports are consistent. She reported to the weekly command conference. Ulthik morale is collapsing. They're pulling back from forward positions, consolidating their forces around major installations. Some of their patrol fleets are refusing to enter sectors where we've been active. The psychological impact of humanity's resurrection was proving as important as their military victories. The Ulthik Empire had built its reputation on the systematic conquest of entire civilizations. They had never faced an enemy that could survive total defeat and return to challenge them. More importantly, Voss continued, we're receiving communications from other species, races that the Ulthik have conquered in the past. They're asking for our help. The implications were staggering. If humanity could inspire other conquered civilizations to resist, the Ulthik Empire could face rebellions across dozens of star systems. The war that had begun with humanity's apparent extinction could end with the liberation of half the galaxy. General Vex studied the tactical displays showing the current strategic situation. The Ulthik still held numerical superiority in ships and personnel, but their forces were scattered across multiple sectors, dealing with threats they had never anticipated. Humanity's transformation from a defensive to an offensive posture had forced the aliens to completely revise their strategic assumptions. What's the status of Operation Awakening? He asked. Admiral Caldrus manipulated the tactical display to show the locations of 12 other species that had been conquered by the Ulthik in the past century. We've made contact with resistance cells in 6 systems. The Vellani and the Rigel sector are particularly promising. They've maintained an underground network for over 30 years, and the Ulthik response, panic. Voss replied with grim satisfaction. They're requesting reinforcements from the 1st and 2nd fleets. High Command is starting to realize that this isn't just a human problem anymore. But even as humanity celebrated its strategic successes, the war was far from over. The Ulthik Empire controlled thousands of worlds and commanded resources that dwarfed human capabilities. The victory at Kepler had proven that humanity could win individual battles, but the larger conflict would require something more, a fundamental change in how the war was fought. The change came from an unexpected source. Deep in the laboratories of the Kepler resistance, scientists who had spent 2 years studying captured Ulthik technology made a discovery that would alter the balance of power across the galaxy. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead researcher on the project, stood before a secure communication link with General Vex, her expression carrying the weight of knowledge that could reshape civilization. General, she said, we've successfully reverse-engineered Ulthik hyperspace communication technology. But more importantly, we've found a way to improve it. The breakthrough was unprecedented. The Ulthik communication network was the foundation of their empire, allowing them to coordinate military operations across vast distances. If humanity could disrupt that network, or better yet, take control of it, they could paralyze the enemy's ability to wage war. What do you need? Vex asked. Access to a major Ulthik communication hub. Vasquez replied. The technology we've developed can insert itself into their network, but it requires a direct connection to their primary systems. The mission that followed was perhaps the most audacious in human military history. A strike force of 50 ships, led by General Voss personally, would assault the Ulthik communication facility at Wolf 359, a heavily fortified installation that served as the primary relay point for their operations in human space. The battle for Wolf 359 lasted 14 hours and cost humanity 23 ships. But when the smoke cleared, human technicians had successfully infiltrated the Ulthik communication network, giving them access to enemy intelligence that revealed the true scope of the Empire's vulnerabilities. They're not just facing rebellion. In human space, Voss reported from the captured facility, there are active resistance movements in over 40 systems. The Empire has been fighting dozens of guerrilla wars simultaneously, and they're losing. The intelligence changed everything. What had appeared to be humanity's isolated struggle for survival was actually part of a galaxy-wide pattern of resistance. The Ulthic Empire, which had seemed invincible, was actually crumbling from within as conquered species learned from humanity's example. General Vex made the decision that would define the rest of the war. Instead of continuing to fight defensively, humanity would take the offensive not just against Ulthic forces, but in support of every species that had ever been conquered by the Empire. Signal all resistance movements, he ordered. This is General Corn Vex of the Human Defense Force. We are no longer fighting for survival. We are fighting for liberation. The message that went out across the galactic communication network was unprecedented in its scope and ambition. Humanity, a species that had been written off as extinct, was declaring war on the largest empire in the galaxy and inviting every other conquered civilization to join them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, human ships were receiving requests for military assistance from dozens of systems. The Vellani rebels provided detailed intelligence about Ulthic installations in their sector. The Korati offered to share their advanced stealth technology. The Nexari, who had been enslaved for over 2 centuries, began coordinating uprisings across their occupied worlds. The Ulthic High Command watched their empire begin to dissolve. With the horror of predators who had suddenly become prey, species that had been pacified for generations were rising in rebellion, armed with human weapons and trained in human tactics. The systematic conquest that had taken them centuries to achieve was unraveling in a matter of months. High Commander Thekmer, stripped of his command after the disaster at Kepler, stood in the detention facility where he awaited trial for military incompetence. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the lights of the Imperial Capital lights that now flickered with the uncertainty of a civilization under siege. The human general who had orchestrated his defeat visited him once, a courtesy that surprised Thekmer with its implications. General Vex stood outside the detention cell, his neural crown glinting in the artificial light, his expression carrying the weight of command and the satisfaction of justified vengeance. You called us primitives, Vex said quietly. You believed that overwhelming force could break our will to resist. But you never understood what you were really fighting. What was I fighting? Thekmer asked, genuinely curious despite his circumstances, the refusal to accept defeat. Vex replied, the capacity to transform destruction into rebirth, the understanding that a species that survives extinction becomes something entirely new, something that cannot be conquered because it has already lost everything it was afraid to lose. Thekmer nodded slowly. You turned your species into something we had never faced before. We turned our species into something we had never been before, Vex corrected, and in doing so, we reminded the galaxy that freedom is not a gift granted by conquerors, it's a choice made by those who refuse to surrender their right to exist. The war continued for 3 more years, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The Ulthic Empire, faced with rebellions across hundreds of worlds, gradually collapsed as their military forces were stretched beyond the breaking point. One by one, conquered species declared their independence, often with human ships providing fire support and human advisors teaching them the tactics of liberation. When the final Ulthic stronghold surrendered, General Vex stood once again on the observation deck of New Horizon. But now he was watching something unprecedented, the largest gathering of free civilizations in galactic history. Representatives from over 100 species had come to witness the signing of the Terran Accords, a document that established the principles of interstellar cooperation and mutual defense. The irony is remarkable, observed Admiral Caldris. Joining him at the observation window, the Ulthic thought they were destroying humanity. Instead, they created the catalyst for their own empire's destruction. Vex nodded, his neural crown processing communications from across the galaxy. Humanity had survived extinction and returned to become the founders of a new galactic civilization. They were no longer the species they had been before the war. They had become something else, something that was defined not by the worlds they controlled, but by the principles they defended. We were called the last humans, he said finally, but we were actually the first of something new. A civilization that exists not because it conquered others, but because it refused to be conquered itself. In the depths of space, the scattered fleets of humanity continued their eternal voyage between the stars. no longer refugees, but guardians of a galaxy that had learned the difference between dominance and freedom. They carried with them the memory of their dead worlds and the promise of new ones yet to be born. A living testament to the power of refusal to surrender. The war was over. The real victory was just beginning. They had been called the last humans. History would remember them as the first citizens of a free galaxy, their voices having called not just millions, but entire civilizations to rise from the ashes of conquest and reclaim their right to exist among the stars. General Corn Vex, no longer the last human general, had become something far more important, the first architect of a galactic civilization, built on the principle that some things are worth dying for, and that those who refuse to surrender them will ultimately find themselves impossible to defeat. The neural crown felt lighter now, connected not just to human ships and sensors, but to the vast network of communication that linked hundreds of worlds in a web of mutual support and shared purpose. In the darkness between stars, humanity had found its true calling, not as conquerors, but as liberators. The story of their resurrection had become legend, but the reality was even more remarkable. They had taken the worst thing that could happen to a species' total military defeat and near extinction and transformed it into the foundation of something unprecedented, a galactic civilization that existed to ensure that no species would ever again face extinction alone. In the end, that was perhaps the most human thing of all, the refusal to let suffering be meaningless, and the determination to ensure that the lessons learned in darkness would light the way for others to follow. The war was over, the galaxy was free, and somewhere in the vast network of ships and stations that humanity called home, new voices were already learning to speak the words that had once seemed impossible. We are still here.